She looked me dead in the eyes, in a room buzzing with laughter and music, surrounded by all her friends. I was standing there, holding 2 drinks, one for each of us, and she just flat out said it. "Stop introducing me as your future wife. It makes me look like I settled for less." And in that moment, something inside me just snapped. Clean in half. It wasn't anger, not really. It was this chilling, crystal clear thud inside me, like something vital just snapped. The kind of icy clarity that hits you when you realize the person you were about to commit your life to has been subtly, quietly, ashamed of you the entire time. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just handed her the drink, turned around, and walked away. But in my head, I was already canceling everything. The venue. The photographer. The entire future we were supposed to build together. By the time I got home that night, I was pulling my name off every shared calendar event, drafting an email to the venue coordinator, and beginning to write a letter that I knew would absolutely destroy her in front of everyone she cared about impressing. But to truly understand that moment, you have to go back. Back 2 years, to a coffee shop in Springfield, where I met Olivia. I honestly believed I'd found someone who saw me, for who I was. She was this bright, creative graphic designer, doing branding for startups. And me? I'm a welder. The kind of guy who comes home with metal shavings in his hair and grease under his nails. That first year? It was incredible. She'd show up at my apartment with takeout, we'd watch movies, she'd laugh at my dumb jokes. I truly thought we were building something solid. She even visited one of my job sites once, watched me work on a custom railing for this mansion in the suburbs of Salem, and told me it was beautiful, that I was talented. I believed her. On our 2-year anniversary, back at that same coffee shop, I proposed. Got down on one knee with a ring I'd saved 6 months to buy, and she said yes, crying happy tears. That's when things started to shift. It was subtle at first, just little comments here and there. I brushed them off, telling myself I was being paranoid. She'd ask if I'd ever thought about going back to school, maybe getting a business degree, doing something more client-facing. Then her parents came to visit. She introduced me as someone who works in construction. Which, technically, wasn't wrong. But it felt like she was sanding down the edges of who I really was. Her mom looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, asking about my 5-year plan. And Olivia just sat there, nodding, like it was a perfectly reasonable question to grill your daughter's fiancé with over dessert. I told myself it was nerves, wedding stress, intense family dynamics. She was just trying to keep the peace. Then came the engagement party her friends threw for us. That's when I saw the real her for the first time. Everyone was sipping champagne, taking pictures, doing that whole performative happiness thing people do at these events. I was talking to one of her coworkers, a guy named Marcus, who kept asking me about my craft in a way that felt incredibly condescending. I played along because I didn't want to embarrass Olivia. At some point, I mentioned my fiancé and I hoping to buy a house next year, and Olivia overheard it. She pulled me aside later, her face tight, a fake smile plastered on, and told me not to call her my fiancé in front of these people because it sounded desperate. I laughed it off, thought she was joking. She wasn't laughing back. The night everything truly fell apart, I was genuinely excited. It was her best friend Chloe's birthday, and I thought it would be fun. I wore the nice shirt she'd bought me, did my hair. I was ready to be the supportive partner. We were standing in a circle with her friends, all talking about their jobs and vacations, doing that subtle one-upping thing people do. I mentioned how my future wife and I were thinking about going to Belize for the honeymoon. I was smiling, proud even, because I'd researched resorts and saved up. That's when she said it. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stop introducing me as your future wife. It makes me look like I settled for less." The whole circle went quiet. Someone coughed. Chloe looked at the floor. I just stood there like an idiot, holding both our drinks, feeling my face go hot, the blood rushing into my ears. Olivia tried to laugh it off, said she was joking, but I saw her friends nod slightly. Like they'd been thinking the same thing, and she just said it out loud. I excused myself, said I needed air, and walked out to the parking lot. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. When she finally came out, she got in the passenger seat and tried to backtrack. Said I was being too sensitive, it was just a joke. But I knew it wasn't. I drove us home in complete silence. And when we got back to the apartment, she went straight to bed like nothing had happened. I stayed up all night, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I went through every shared calendar event, every vendor email, every plan we'd made. I removed my name from her company's holiday party, from her sister's baby shower, from the charity gala her mom had roped us into. I drafted that email to the venue coordinator about cancellation policies. And I wrote the letter, the one that would go in the envelope, the one that laid out exactly why I was done. Every word was surgical. By sunrise, my decision was made. When Olivia woke up and asked if I wanted coffee, I just said sure, with the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that in 72 hours, she'd be opening that envelope in front of all her friends at brunch, reading the words that would confirm she was right about one thing. She had settled. But not in the way she thought. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. I was living with someone who had no clue I'd already ended our relationship in every way that mattered. Olivia went about her normal routine, talking about centerpiece options and whether we should do a cocktail hour or go straight to dinner. I just nodded along, pretending I was still invested. She asked me to confirm our RSVPs for her friend Chloe's gallery opening next month, and I told her I'd handle it. I did. By sending Chloe a polite message explaining that Olivia and I were no longer together, and asking if she'd be willing to help me with something that required perfect timing. Chloe responded within an hour. Said she'd suspected things weren't right between us and asked what I needed. I explained the plan. Olivia had scheduled brunch with her core friend group at that upscale place in Capitol Hill, the one with the fancy mimosas and the 3-week wait list. Chloe was supposed to be there anyway, so I asked if she could arrive early, give the hostess an envelope with Olivia's name on it, and make sure it got delivered to the table right after they ordered. Chloe didn't even hesitate. She said Olivia had been getting more insufferable lately and she was curious to see how this would play out. I spent that evening crafting the letter, making sure every sentence was clear, impossible to misinterpret. I didn't insult her. I didn't call her names. I just laid out the facts in a way that would be humiliating precisely because it was true. I explained that I'd cancelled the venue, that I'd removed myself from all future plans, and that I was done being treated like a consolation prize by someone who'd spent the last 6 months making me feel like I wasn't good enough. I included a copy of the venue cancellation confirmation, printed it all on nice paper, put it in a cream-colored envelope, and sealed it with the kind of finality that felt like closing a coffin. The morning of the brunch, I woke up early, made myself breakfast, and watched Olivia get ready like she was preparing for a fashion show. She tried on 3 different outfits, did her makeup twice, kept asking if she looked okay. What else was I going to say? I told her she looked great. She left the apartment around 10:30, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, and told me she'd be back around 2. I gave it 20 minutes, then texted Chloe to confirm the envelope was in place. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji and told me she'd give me a full report later. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the apartment, but mostly I just sat on the couch, imagining how it would go down. Olivia would sit down with her friends. They'd order their overpriced brunch plates and bottomless mimosas. They'd start gossiping about whoever wasn't there, and then the hostess would approach the table with the envelope. Olivia would open it, probably expecting some cute surprise or promotional thing, and instead, she'd see her entire future evaporate. In front of the same people she'd been performing for this whole time. Around 11:45, my phone started blowing up. First, it was a call from Olivia, then 3 more in rapid succession, then a string of texts that devolved from confusion to panic to rage in the span of 10 minutes. She wanted to know if this was a joke, if I was serious, if I'd actually cancelled everything. I didn't respond to any of it. The silence said more than any explanation could. Chloe texted me around noon with a play-by-play that was almost too perfect. Apparently, Olivia had opened the envelope mid-sip of her mimosa, read the first few lines, and gone completely white. Her maid of honor asked if she was okay, and Olivia just shook her head, kept reading, then stood up so fast she knocked her chair over. She tried to say something, started crying, grabbed her purse, and basically ran out of the restaurant while all her friends sat there in shocked silence, staring at each other. Chloe said one of them picked up the letter from where Olivia had dropped it, read it out loud to the table, and the entire group just went quiet before someone finally said, "Well, I guess we should still eat since we already ordered." I would have paid money to see Olivia's face in that moment. The exact second she realized I wasn't bluffing, that I'd actually pulled the plug on everything while she was out brunching with people she cared more about impressing than respecting me. By 1 p.m., she was at the apartment, banging on the door so hard I thought she might break it. I opened it and she stormed in, mascara streaked down her face, waving the letter around like it was evidence of a crime I'd committed. She started yelling about how I'd humiliated her. How could I do this in front of her friends? How I'd ruined everything. I just stood there, letting her get it all out, because I knew once she was done, I'd say the one thing that would break her completely. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I looked at her and said exactly what I'd been rehearsing. "I just didn't want you to look like you settled for less." She froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched her brain try to process the fact that I'd used her own words against her, thrown them back in her face with the same casual cruelty she'd used at that party. Then she switched tactics, went from crying to angry to manipulative in the span of 30 seconds. She told me I was overreacting, that I'd taken one comment out of context and blown up our entire relationship over nothing, that she'd been stressed and didn't mean it the way it sounded. I asked her if she remembered introducing me as just someone in construction to her parents. If she remembered telling me not to call her my fiancé at the engagement party. If she remembered any of the 100 other tiny cuts she'd made over the past year. She didn't have an answer for that. Just pivoted to attacking me instead. She said I was insecure, that I was punishing her for being honest, that maybe she had settled and this whole meltdown was just proving her right. That's when I saw the real Olivia. Not the woman I proposed to, but the person who'd been hiding underneath the whole time. Someone who genuinely believed she was better than me, and was offended that I had the audacity to walk away first. I told her she had 1 week to get her stuff out of the apartment, that I'd already started the process with the landlord to remove her from the lease, and that if she tried to contact me again, I'd block her number. She laughed. Said I couldn't just kick her out, that she'd make my life miserable, that everyone would know what a vindictive person I was. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of her texts to her friends, where she called me blue collar and joked about upgrading after the wedding. Messages Chloe, her maid of honor, had forwarded me weeks ago when she'd started to feel guilty about keeping quiet. Olivia's face went from angry to panic to defeated in the time it took her to realize I had receipts for everything. She grabbed the letter off the counter, tore it in half, threw it at me, and walked out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I picked up the torn pieces of paper, taped them back together, and put them in a folder labeled evidence because I had a feeling this wasn't over. That she was going to come back with a new strategy, and I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. The week I'd given Olivia to collect her things turned into the longest 7 days of my life. Not because I regretted my decision, but because she refused to accept that it was actually happening. The calls started around 10 p.m. that first night, back to back, until I turned my phone on silent and watched the screen light up over and over with her name. By morning, there were 37 missed calls in a voicemail inbox so full I couldn't receive new messages. I made the mistake of listening to a few of them. And it was like watching someone cycle through every manipulation tactic in the book. The first messages were crying and apologizing, saying she'd made a horrible mistake and begging me to reconsider. Then they shifted to bargaining, promising she'd change, that she'd go to therapy, that she'd never make another comment about my job again. By message 15, she was angry, calling me vindictive and cruel, telling me I was going to regret throwing away what we had. The last few messages were just incoherent sobbing, mixed with threats about how I'd never find anyone better, and how she hoped I ended up alone. I deleted all of them and blocked her number. But apparently, she'd anticipated that, because she started calling from different phones, her friends' numbers, even when I'm pretty sure was her mom's cell. My buddy David came over that second evening with beer and pizza. Took one look at my phone blowing up on the counter and told me I'd dodged a nuke. He said he'd never liked Olivia, that she'd always had this way of talking down to people she thought were beneath her, and that he'd been waiting for me to wake up and see it. We sat there eating pizza while my phone vibrated itself halfway across the counter. And David told me about how Olivia had once made a comment at a barbecue about how it was cute that I worked with my hands, like it was some kind of novelty hobby instead of a real career. I hadn't heard her say it, but apparently everyone else had, and they'd all just awkwardly changed the subject while I was inside grabbing more drinks. The next morning, I woke up to someone banging on my apartment door at 7 a.m. For a second, I thought maybe Olivia had come back to actually get her stuff. Instead, it was her mom, dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, and the look on her face could have curdled milk. She pushed past me into the apartment and started lecturing me about responsibility and commitment, and how her daughter had lowered herself to be with someone like me. I just stood there in my pajama pants and old t-shirt, listening to this woman who'd never respected me for a single second tell me what a disappointment I was. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her to leave, and she refused. Said she wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to fix this mess I created. That's when I pulled up my phone, showed her the screenshots of Olivia's texts about me being blue-collar and temporary, and watched her face go from righteous anger to uncomfortable silence. She tried to recover, said those messages were taken out of context, that Olivia had just been venting to friends, but the damage was done. I told her she had 60 seconds to leave before I called building security, and she left muttering about how I'd never amount to anything. Anyway, on day 5, around noon, I got a call from my landlord saying Olivia had shown up at the leasing office trying to get a key to the apartment, claiming she still lived there and I'd illegally locked her out. I had to send him a copy of the lease modification paperwork showing her removal was in process, along with proof that I'd given her written notice to collect her belongings. He apologized for the inconvenience and mentioned she'd made quite a scene in the office, crying and insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Day 6 was when things escalated. I came home from work that evening to find my apartment had been broken into. And I knew immediately it was Olivia, because nothing was actually stolen, just destroyed. The TV was still there, but the screen was shattered. My PlayStation was in pieces on the floor. There was milk poured all over the couch and the carpet. Picture frames were smashed. Clothes were scattered everywhere, some of them cut up with scissors. It was like a tornado of pure rage had torn through the place, and the only thing left untouched was the folder with evidence I'd hidden in my truck. I took photos of everything, called the police, and filed a report for property destruction. The officer who showed up took one look around and asked if I had a crazy ex-girlfriend. Said he'd seen this kind of thing 100 times. I showed him the timeline of events, the threatening voicemails I'd saved, the texts from unknown numbers, and he noted all of it in his report. He told me to document everything, keep records of all contact attempts, and consider getting a restraining order if she didn't stop. Olivia had 7 days to get her stuff, and she'd spend it committing a felony instead. Over the next 2 weeks, things got progressively weirder. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be. The gym I went to, the coffee shop near my work, even the hardware store I stopped at on weekends. She'd just stand there staring at me, not saying anything, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her friends started reaching out, too. Some of them trying to play mediator, others straight up telling me I was wrong for how I'd handled things. Chloe was the only one who stayed neutral. Told me Olivia had been spiraling since the brunch incident, posting cryptic stuff on social media about betrayal and heartbreak, fishing for sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. I took the engagement ring to a jeweler and asked about melting it down. The guy looked at me like I was insane until I explained the situation. Then he got this understanding look and said he could turn it into a keychain, or a paperweight, or basically anything I wanted. I told him to make it into a small bar, something I could keep as a reminder that I'd literally melted down a bad decision and turned it into something useful. It took a week, but when I picked it up, holding this little silver rectangle that used to represent a future with someone who'd never valued me, it felt like closing a chapter. Everything expensive I'd bought her over the years, the designer purse, the fancy winter coat, the jewelry, I donated it all to a women's shelter in Fairview. I figured someone who actually needed those things should have them instead of letting Olivia use them as props for her performance of a perfect life. I sent her a text from a new number letting her know she had 24 hours to collect any remaining items from a storage unit I'd rented, and that after that I'd be donating whatever was left. She responded immediately. Said I had no right to touch her things, that she'd sue me, that I was going to pay for all of this. I didn't respond, just screenshotted the message and added it to my growing folder of documentation. 3 weeks after the brunch incident, David dragged me out to a bar in Southside. Said I needed to stop hiding in my apartment and start living again. We were sitting there playing pool when Olivia walked in, clearly already several drinks deep, and made a beeline for us. She climbed up onto a bar stool in the middle of the room and started loudly telling everyone about how she'd been betrayed by someone she'd given everything to, how she'd wasted years of her life on someone who wasn't worth it. People were staring, some of them recording on their phones, and I just stood there with my pool cue, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. David tried to get the bartender's attention, but Olivia wasn't done. She started pointing at me, telling the whole bar about how I'd humiliated her, ruined her life, destroyed her reputation. Someone near the back yelled at her to get down, and she ignored them, kept going until she was practically screaming. That's when I walked over, looked up at her, and said the only thing that felt appropriate in that moment. "You're right. I hope you find someone better than me, because the whole point is for me to never meet someone like you ever again." The bar went completely silent for about 3 seconds, and then someone started laughing, and then someone else, and suddenly the whole place was losing it. Olivia's face went from dramatic grief to pure humiliation. She tried to climb down from the bar stool but stumbled and nearly fell before the bouncer caught her arm. He escorted her out while she was still yelling something about me being a terrible person, and the bartender gave David and me a round on the house for the entertainment. 2 months later, I got a check in the mail from Small Claims Court, reimbursement for the property damage Olivia had caused when she trashed my apartment. I used it to buy a new PlayStation, a better TV than the one she destroyed, and put the rest in savings. Life went back to normal, slowly. Work kept me busy. I started going to the gym more, picked up some freelance welding projects on the side. Olivia's social media went quiet eventually, and Chloe told me she'd moved to a different part of town and was telling people we'd had a mutual breakup, which was such a pathetic rewrite of history that I didn't even bother correcting it. Sometimes I think about that moment at the party when she said I made her look like she'd settled, and I realized she'd done me the biggest favor of my life by showing me exactly who she was before I made the mistake of marrying her. Being alone turned out to be so much better than being with someone who measured my worth by job titles and social status. David was right. I hadn't just dodged a bullet. I'd dodged a whole firing squad. And every day I woke up in my quiet apartment, without someone making me feel inadequate, was a reminder that I'd made the right choice. The only choice that made sense once I'd finally seen the truth. Has anyone ever shown you who they really were just in the nick of time?